My cattle prod. Oh. Oh, since you, like me, seem to like to walk around, when I mention this, it'll be about 5-6 minutes. Would you give one of those to each person?
Oh, yeah, I got it.
Not ready?
Okay, you got it.
Yep, got it. Okay, folks, time to go to work. Snack time is over, although we could probably all eat more of those. Lots of choices, all yummy, you're right. There wasn't anything on there that I would have said, no, I don't want that. It was more take a little and get away.
I know, that's what I said. I was glad I didn't have a bigger plate because I wanted.
Yes. That was good stewardship from the hotel.
Yes, sir, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Still got a few MIA.
Like, I don't remember
Okay.
bills like I looked at.
All right. All right. Doors are being closed. All right. And if in your advocacy you could move this big column from the middle of the room, that would really be good. Wow. Talk about a barrier. Okay. I've alluded to it earlier when I talked about public policy and the branches of government and the rules and the laws and court decisions. Now I want to get into it in terms of where we are in 2022 and how we have shifted in law, in regulations, but not necessarily in practice or belief, the elimination, and please hear me, of the stigma of the deficit model of disability, the medical model of fixing broken people. Not to deny disability. It is an important characteristic. But so is your height, so is your weight, so is your hair color, so is the color of your skin. And we can go down the list of all kinds of characteristics. What we don't want is the disability to define you. And that's what we have historically done. People with this do that. The label defines you. It stigmatizes you. It stereotypes you. And I'll give you a most recent example where at one point it was sort of good news and then it wasn't. The National Down Syndrome Society has a new person who's been hired, I think in January, to do employment stuff across the country. And one of the hats I wear, because I don't know if you saw my bio or not, is I'm a subject matter expert on employment first for the U.S. Department of Labor and have been since 2012. So he got my name and he called me and he said, let me tell you what happened to me last week. And these are the kinds of things you can't make up. And it was sort of good news, bad news. He said, I got a call from an employer who's had an employee who happens to have Down syndrome working for them. And now that the pandemic is easing up, they're bringing people back to work. And here's what the employer said. I'd like to hire another person with Down syndrome. Okay? That was one. The same week, 4 days later, a different employer in a different part of the country. Same thing. Hi, we're reopening and we've got this wonderful employee with Down syndrome. We'd like to hire another. And he wasn't sure how to respond. So I spent some time with him because that's stigma in a better way, but it's again, all people with Down syndrome can do this job. And I said, we really need to get the employer to understand you might have another person with Down syndrome who has those skills and interests, or a person with another kind of a disability who does, but you might also have a whole bunch of people with Down syndrome who are interested in doing all kinds of other things. And we spent almost an hour just trying to get him comfortable. How does he respond? Because you hate to say no to an employer, right, when you've got a job opening, but not get caught up in, I'm going to send you a carbon copy of Rena, because she's great, so I want her reinforced, okay? So again, this is out there. We're still into the stigma stereotyping of a label. That's certainly better than saying they belong in an institution, okay? But it's not where we want to be about individualization. And as I wrote up here, person-centered, disability justice approach. And here are the words you're going to hear a lot of. Strengths, preferences, interest, and informed choice for valued outcomes and belonging. That's a mouthful. You have been given the slides. There are a lot of them. There will not be a test at the end of this because it's a lot of information. But what I like to do when I do this training, because you can use this, is I give you citations. I'll explain to you USC, CFR. So if you need to use this in meetings, you've got the legal citation, not just a bullet that says IDEA says this, or Voc Rehab says that, or Medicaid says this. So you've got actual language, but what I want you to be listening for is the themes and the consistency of where we are today, in large part because of the Developmental Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights Act. Okay? So, this is a quote. I'm sure when you heard Colleen Wick, she talked about history, and you saw the ebbs and the flows of the images of people with disabilities going back to Greek society and in the early parts of the country, some states and whatever. This is Churchill. Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Keep the rear view mirror up. Don't ever forget where we came from in law, in policy, and in practice, because there will always be somebody or some entity that says, I bet if we try it again, we can do it better this time. No, a failed approach is a failed approach. An approach based on stigma is a bad approach. We're past that. Okay, again, there's a ton of stuff here. I just wanted you to see the big things. So 1848, does anybody know what happened in this country? Do you remember from Colleen? Was the beginning. Okay, again, not a test, but it's an important date. That was the opening of the first state institution in the United States, the Walter J. Fernald State School in Massachusetts. It finally closed 3 years ago. Had a long life. And it started based on a European concept of having a school with a farm that the children, young adults, would go to Monday through Friday. They would go home to spend the weekend with their family and then go back. And they were going to go to school and they were going to do farming and all that stuff. Within less than a year, it became a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week institution. It didn't work. I don't know if you know any folks active in the autism communities around the country. We are recreating farmsteads for people with autism in some states. We don't learn. Oh, they like to do agriculture. See, same thing. Everybody who has autism wants to work on a farm? I don't think so. We know some people who are in the autism spectrum have superb technology skills and computer data entry and all that stuff. Everybody's different. But again, that way we can organize them, we'll keep them safe, all that kind of stuff. So we don't seem to learn. So in 1866, Daryl, if you could pass that piece of paper out, please. Mr. Howe, who helped create Fernald, was doing something, look at this, 18 years later. And I'm giving this to you, I'll read the key phrases, but this was 1866. That's a blip in history, right? Okay? And this was in a different place 18 years later, and he says, grave errors were incorporated into the very organic principles of our institutions, which make them like asylums, because we had psychiatric asylums even before we had state schools for the, quote, mentally retarded. All right, all great establishments where the sexes must be separate, boarding in common, sleeping, blah, 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 okay, are unnatural, undesirable, and very liable to abuse. We should have as few as possible. Then look at that third paragraph. As much as may be, surround insane and excitable persons with sane people and ordinary influences, vicious children with virtuous people and virtuous influence, blind children with those who see, mute children with those who speak, and the like. Folks, that's inclusion. He didn't call it, he didn't have the word. So inclusion, in Allen's opinion, has been a recommendation since 1866. We're coming up on 160 years from that in 4 years, and we're still fighting that in most every school district in the United States of America. So my new line, no offense to people with disabilities who have often been referred to as slow learners. It's not the people with disabilities. It's the systems, the bureaucrats, the clinicians, and the professionals who get stuck and get comfortable and don't want to change. After this, every state opened one or more institutions, in spite of his saying, don't do it. Okay? It's just, it's pathetic in some ways, but it's the real world. And that's why I said we've got to know the history. There are people who are talking about reopening different kinds of institutions in some states now. They'll be more campus-like, they'll be prettier, there'll be smaller dormitories, there'll be cottages. A segregated institution is a segregated institution, okay? It is what it is, and we know we don't need them. We know we don't need them. And hopefully, all right. Buck v. Bell. I didn't give this one to you, I don't think. But any of you know about this case, involuntary sterilization in Virginia? Okay, women with disabilities. Okay. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. You remember that name from history? Highly revered U.S. Supreme Court justice. He wrote the opinion. It's always of interest to me why Chief Justices choose to write certain opinions, Mr. Tucker, because most of the time they don't. We'll tell you why. We found it out 5 years ago. Here's the language. Talk about values. This is now, folks, 1927. That's 95 years ago. In history, and I'm not a historian, that's a blip. That's not a lot of time, okay? Carrie Buck, listen to the words, is a feeble-minded white woman who was committed to the state colony, their institution. She is the daughter of a feeble-minded mother in the same institution, and the mother of an illegitimate feeble-minded child. She was 18 years old, time of the trial in Virginia, and what they did is an involuntary sterilization. And the challenge was, should they have done that? That violated her rights. And he goes on to say, many defective persons who, if now discharged, would become a menace, but if incapable of procreating, might be discharged with safety, and listen to the good stuff in here, and become self-supporting with benefits to themselves and society. So there was a little thread in there.
Can I make one brief point, Alan?
Yeah.
To your point, these issues never completely go away. In the last couple of years, at ADAP, we got a call from a judge in Alabama asking if he could do what the 1927 opinion said. So this issue is alive today. I was glad the judge called and asked.
Yeah, so am I.
I gave the judge the answer, which is no, but somebody had gone to court in Alabama to ask an Alabama judge to do what Alan is describing.
Painful but true, okay? And here's what he says. Experience has shown hereditary plays an important part in the transmission of insanity, imbecility, etc. And it goes on. I'm not going to read the rest to you, but here's the message. We were in a period of eugenics in this country at that time, in case you don't know, and there was a lot of belief that intellectual disability or imbecility, moron, idiot were the terms of the day, and psychiatric disability was all inherited. I hope you know the statistics, less than 3%. Less than 3%. But what a nice, simple solution to a complex problem. We'll just sterilize all you folks and then go off and do your thing. We won't have any more of you. Not true, but it was the belief. Here's what we learned about 5 years ago in the eugenics movement. The Chief Justice's brother, Mr. Tucker, was a professor of eugenics at Harvard, and he was his insider source of information to write this strong judicial decision. Okay? There was a connection, and I'm not saying it was a bad one. That was the academic belief at the time, the Jukes and the Calicacs, you can remember some of that stuff. Okay? If we just sterilize people, we won't have it anymore. Now, here's the piece that's not in the history books that I want you to know. And it's very important in terms of disability history. I think Colleen would have alluded to it because she's done a new video on this. A guy named Hitler, you've heard of him? He sent his people to the Virginia colony, okay? And to other state institutions where we were doing experimentation on people with intellectual, developmental disabilities, and psychiatric disabilities. And they took back all the eugenics stuff to support Mr. Hitler with his Aryan perfect race. And if you dig to the literature, the first people that were systematically killed by Mr. Hitler were people with disabilities, 60,000, I believe, okay? The next group were people called gypsies, probably people today we would say LGBTQ. And then here's the part that's really ugly. Military veterans of German descent who were white but now had a significant disability were also systematically exterminated and euthanized, okay? So, not blaming us, but part of the Holocaust got its beginning or reinforcement with state institutions in the US. And now if you go to most Holocaust museums, they have incorporated this piece on the front end of the tour to let people know it was lots of different groups that got exterminated in the name of the Aryan race. So, all right. Fair labor standards, sub-minimum wage, sheltered workshop, came about in 1938. Okay, we didn't have special ed law, we didn't have assistive technology, we didn't have strategic analysis, systematic instruction, I can go down all the list, universal design. We had none of that. It was meant to be something okay, and we're still debating it now in 2022 about, well, we'll still need those sheltered workshops for those people who can't work. I hope I will convince you by the end of the day there is no research to support that at all, none at all, okay? The ARC and UCP got started in 48. 1950, again important, aid to the permanently and totally disabled. Isn't that nice? Mm-hmm. That was welfare. It used to be state federal match. In 1972, and you know it today, it's called Supplemental Security Income, SSI, okay? Be clear, folks. People get mad at me on this one, James. SSI is not Social Security. It's a welfare check from the general fund issued by the Social Security Administration based on the criteria from 1950 of permanently and totally disabled, helpless, hopeless, and we'll give them a welfare check. And there are certain people in DC, I will not name them, who are unwilling, even in a different Congress, to open the statute and redefine it, for fear we'll lose the sacred entitlement to welfare and lifelong dependency and poverty. Just letting you know, some of us tried to do that 30 years ago, 25 years ago in DC, and we got certain places of resistance, we just couldn't pull it off. And that was in a very bipartisan congressional environment, but certain people with the name advocates said, don't you touch that. So it's still here. Okay, President Kennedy, 1963, the original MR legislation and mental health, which became DD. Right to education, 1969. Parents Pennsylvania sued because, and I don't know if Colleen covered this, but you need to know, the entry requirements to go to public school in Pennsylvania. You ready? You had to walk, you had to talk, and you had to be toilet trained. Show me one study that any three of those things have anything to do with the ability to learn. You want to talk about stigma and stereotype? By the time we got special ed law passed in '75, we had 26 right to education cases, and Congress estimated there were 5 to 7 million children in the United States being denied an education, rotting, or if they were lucky, maybe in the church basement with a volunteer. Okay? Parents brought that litigation, and they fortunately got a young lawyer named Thomas Gilhool, who passed away recently, sorry to say. And Tom had a sibling, and he met with the parents, and they were going to do this in state court. And Tom said, let me think about it. And he came back and said, I want to take your case. I think we can win it, and we can win it in federal court on discrimination and civil rights. The parents then said, excuse me, we got to think about that. It had taken them 2 years to get the guts to sue the state in state court. Well, they did, and they won big time to the point of settling. And in hindsight, my sense is too bad they settled. We might have been further ahead. But again, this was 69, 70. Here were the principles that I want you to hear, the values that the case was brought on. Because people don't talk about this when we talk about IDEA. Okay? Equal protection, you heard of that one in the Constitution, Bill of Rights? Due process and deprivation of liberty. I don't know, James, if you ever got to know Tom or work with him. I had the privilege. And what a gifted civil rights attorney. And here's how he brought the case to the judge, which is why the state wanted to settle, because the judge was lapping it up. I think he would have thrown the book at the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But what Tom used was a criminal justice analogy, particularly on equal protection and due process. He said, these kids didn't do anything wrong. Why are they being denied the right to go to school and have an education? Because we didn't have all the tools we have now. He said, you know, you can't deprive them of liberty. Liberty is the neighborhood school where they would go with their age peers. But if you have to remove them to a self-contained classroom or a special school, you must return them to liberty ASAP. That never made it into special ed law because they have not committed a crime. And he said, even when people commit crimes, it's for a fixed amount of time, and then maybe they're let out of jail and parole. Just, I think, a brilliant analogy of our civil rights structure, and saying, these kids didn't commit any crimes. Yes, they have a disability. Some may not speak well. Some may not learn the same way as other people, and went on and on. But it took that case and 25 more before in 1975 we got the Education for All Handicapped Children's Act. And again, we have pretty much stricken that word handicap. How come? You know where it comes from and what it means? Yes?
It means when people used to be on the corner and they had a disability, they mangled them or whatever, and they would have their hand in cap.
Yes. And it was really started in the UK and then came over here. Okay, so again, it's the pity charity model. We have rejected that word. It doesn't exist in any federal legislation anymore, but lots of people still use it, okay? Don't use that word. It brings up all the wrong associations. The word, and I know some of you don't like the word disability, that is the word. Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, Vocational Rehabilitation for People with Disabilities, the Americans with Disabilities Act, Home and Community-Based Services waivers for people with disabilities and the elderly. That's the term, Get comfortable with it and don't get caught up with trying to use other language. So anyhow, that was special ed finally in 1975. But before that, the Protection and Advocacy Systems, here known as ADAP, were added to the DD Act, and the DD Act was created in 1970 from the original 1963 Mental Retardation Act. Again, just want you to see this because we're going to come back to this. Section 504 happened in 1973. Medicaid waivers were started in 1981 as an alternative to institutionalization. We'll come back to 84. Independence, productivity, and integration were put into the Developmental Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights Act as goals, outcomes. I wasn't in DC at the time, but the people who were there were really smart on the lobbying side. They didn't trust the feds who would write the rules to define those terms. And independence still gets us in a lot of trouble with families because we take it literally as footloose and fancy-free. Let me be clear. None of us are literally independent. I was interdependent on 2 flights yesterday. Either one of those messed up, I'm not here, potentially, okay? We're all interdependent. Independence in the law, exerting choice and control. That's the definition of the term, and I'll show it to you again in a little bit. That's really important to know because there are a lot of professionals, oh, Johnny can never be independent, Susie can never be independent, whatever. Well, again, neither are they, but that's a whole different story. So don't get caught up in the jargon. Independence, and again, this was Senator Lowell Weicker, if you heard that name, from Connecticut. Lowell Weicker happened to have a son with Down syndrome named Sonny, and he was chairing the Senate committee at the time. We had a very amenable supporter of putting this stuff in. Productivity, having a meaningful contributing employment in the community or a meaningful volunteer situation. Nothing about sheltered workshops, nothing about sitting at home watching TV or going to a day program. And integration. Access to the community and resources just like the rest of us. The DD Act launched all this in 1984. That governs the 3 DD network partners that are sponsoring partners. That's the law. They can't negotiate that. That's what their charge is to do and more, and we'll get there. Okay, we'll come back to technology in 88. ADA we talked about 1990. IDEA transition, okay, Rehab Act. I'm going to get to that. So I just wanted to get the flavor. There's been all these things, the Olmsted case we'll talk about, more transition amendments, and there's tons of stuff here. Mental health parity. I put this one up here because this shows me, for you, what happens when we have bipartisanship. These names may not mean anything to you. Paul Wellstone, now deceased, was a very liberal Democrat from Minnesota who, in fact, many people said was a socialist, whatever that means to them. That's how he was ultra left at that time in the U.S. Senate and proud of his values. Peter Domenici, a senator from New Mexico, was the chair of the Senate Budget Committee and pretty conservative. He may not be quite where some people are, but he was very far right at the time. Yet somehow, these 2 people who politically were at different ends of the spectrum came together. Why? What do you think brought them together? Come on. Huh? Close. Children, family, yeah. Paul Wellstone had a brother with very significant mental health issues. Private insurance was paying nothing. His parents were spending a fortune. Inpatient hospitalization, outpatient therapy, medications, all of that, all out of pocket. Not copays, all out of pocket. Pete Domenici admitted to him when they started talking about the bill, he had a daughter with chronic schizophrenia. And guess what? He was even probably wealthier than the Wellstone family, but he said, we're going broke. We're paying every dollar. when she has to go in the hospital, when she gets outpatient treatment, her medications, which again weren't as frequent as they are today, were very costly. And so here were these two guys, very different, coming together because it was a common problem that they shared, and they knew there were millions of people who shared it, and all the partisan stuff went down the toilet. That's where we must come from. Our stuff is not partisan. It affects young, old, Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, and everybody else. I'll show you a statement in a few minutes from Senator Dole. But they did this, and guess what? Hardly anybody voted no when you've got the ultra-left and the ultra-right, and they're making it personal on the floor of the Senate. You're going to say, excuse me, you got your head up, you're you know what? No, you're not. You're going to vote yes. Okay? That passed phenomenally. We're still having problems with it, but it basically was the beginning of saying to insurance companies, you got to pay equitably for mental health as well. Okay? We're not there yet, but we're getting better. Okay, again, a lot of this stuff is up here. Oh, Partlow closed. Up earlier, I think, was Wyatt v. Stickney. That's your claim to fame. Okay, and here are some anniversaries this year, and the question is, what's been achieved? So here's Mr. Dole's statement, and you did receive this one earlier, I believe. Okay? Bob Dole was a great friend, if you don't know that. He joined the club in World War II. Here's his opening remarks when he joined the U.S. Senate 25 years later in 1969. He had just been elected. Okay? Look at the words. An exceptional group, a minority group whose existence affects every person in our society and the very fiber of our nation. No one joins by personal choice, but here's the part I want you to use. A group whose requirements for membership are not based on age, sex, wealth, education, skin color, religious belief, political party, power, or prestige. Could you ask for anything better to be using in our political environment than a statement from Bob Dole, 1969, saying this club has, in my words, not his, 24-hour open enrollment. Okay? Some kids are born into it. Some kids acquire it in early childhood, genetic mutations or accidents or injury. Adolescents, I used to serve as the CEO of the Brain Injury Association. You know, adolescents are immortal. They can drink and drive and speed, and then they get TBI and spinal cord injuries. Okay. And then MS starts to surface in the 30s and 40s, and then people start having heart attacks and strokes and cancer. And then as some of us get even a little older, the knees don't work so good, the hips don't work so well, the eyes don't work so well, the ears don't work so well, and more than likely for most of us, if we live long enough, the brain cells start to not work so well. So it's only a question of when and how you get in, and I think this is really important when somebody might say, oh, you're a self-serving special interest group. You're not. You are not a self-serving special interest group. A colleague of mine in DC used to say, for those who aren't in it yet, we're the Paul Reveres for the next person coming in. Think about it, isn't that nice? Okay? This isn't just about us. This is a social issue, and as society ages, guess what? There are going to be more people in the club. Okay? And if you follow the incidence of autism for whatever the cause is, it's huge. So I gave this one to you. Feel free to copy it. Use it if you ever get caught up in a situation where somebody's telling you, oh, that's just a liberal democratic agenda. No, it's not. And don't put it in that language. Our stuff is not partisan. Okay? The councils. Daryl, Holly, and your council. Again, that's part of why you're here. Okay? Advocacy, capacity building, and systemic change consistent with the purpose, and the purpose applies to all the DD network. Okay? But again, important to know when we get into this, this is the federal definition of developmental disabilities. It is very narrow. 3 or more out of 7 substantial functional limitations. That was intentional because this was the group that was often most slighted, people with the more significant or more intense support needs, as we would say now using TASH language, but those were the people who were most excluded from everything, not that other people weren't. So this was the target. So think about it. If what I'm going to show you now applies to this subpopulation, it certainly ought to apply to everybody else in terms of the language and the expectation. Okay? And again, I showed it to you earlier, but look at this, 1984. Achieved their best through living and working in the community. We're still fighting that in 2022, and not just in Alabama, in most states. Why is that? What is the resistance to this set of guiding principles and values and beliefs? Particularly when I'll show you we've got all the research to back it up. So, independence, productivity, integration, all right? 1990, oh my God, we added a couple of more things. The individual and families need to participate in design, promote self-determination. We added that to independence, productivity, integration, and we added inclusion. So those 5 cores, which haven't changed, have been in the Federal DD Act for now 32 years. How many of your state agencies buy that? Don't have to answer. And I don't mean just here. Okay? That's the law of the land of those 3 agencies, the Council, the Protection and Advocacy, and the USAID, and it's supposed to ripple into the state system for people's lives. And we added culturally competent. Okay? There we are, look at it. Made it clear in the law, that's why it's in quotes, individuals with DD, including those with the most severe, are capable of those outcomes. We are not excluding anyone because once you do that, ladies and gentlemen, creaming becomes the order of the day. I've seen it. And then every year when money gets tighter, well, we'll add another 10% into, well, this doesn't apply to them. And pretty soon we're down to 2% who get it, and everybody else goes back to the custodial day program. Not acceptable. The goal is the goal for everyone. Okay? And then we added this language. Again, 1990. This is the end of the medical model. I want you to see it. Strengths, unique strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, and capabilities. Those themes from the DD Act is what you're going to see when I get through here in every federal law today. It is absolutely mind-boggling alignment. We are clear what we are talking about in every federal law. Your job as advocates is to hear it, internalize it, get passionate about it, and then use it in your meetings with legislators, state agencies, and school boards because they don't know it. And you're not going to hit them over the head with it. You're going to bring them into it by sharing, and we'll get into that in the meeting prep. Okay? Inclusion. Again, live in homes close to community resources, regular contacts with individuals without disabilities in their own communities. Radical thought. Okay? There's employment again. Integration, same community. And then I love this from Mr. Einstein, and I will go back and forth with some quotes. And I add some as I find new ones. But look at this. Everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it is stupid. Okay? You could train them all day long. Not going to happen. Example. Did Eric leave? No, Eric's here. Okay, you'll appreciate this one. I was working with an agency in a state, I don't want to name it, that was beginning to start closing sheltered workshops. And so I was in the sheltered workshop, and they had a ballpoint pen contract. They used to be fairly common in the old days, you know, these typical ballpoint pens. They'd have a little wooden jig box, and the first person would put the bottom plastic in, the next person puts in the spring, the next person puts in the ink cartridge, and the last person screws the top on. That's typical ballpoint pen. So I'm watching this, and it was hard for me to believe this. The person, Eric, who had the last part of the assembly was a gentleman with significant motor dexterity issues secondary to cerebral palsy. There was no way in hell, no matter how much they trained him, that he had the neuromuscular capability to do that. And at that point, we didn't have some of the assistive technology we did and whatever. So I said to the supervisor out in the hall, I said, why is he doing that? And you're going to love this. Well, that's the only job he's ever done since he's been here, and he loves it. I said, what kind of BS are you giving me? He loves it. It's the only thing people have let him do, so he's figuring he'll do the best he can. I'm pleased to tell you, 2 years later, with customized employment done well, he's working in a law office, doing all kinds of interesting stuff where he doesn't have to use his hands as much, and he's also got a computer with some assistive technology where he can talk into it, because he didn't have verbal issues, he had manual dexterity issues. Okay? Then we capitalized on his strengths. But again, that's Einstein. That's what Einstein is saying. You know, you can try to fix the deficit all day long. Probably not going to happen. And so you just frustrate him, but you think he's happy. Okay, so here we go of where we've been. This is from the work of Dr. Beth Mount, one of the earliest people doing personal futures planning. And unfortunately, this still exists in Alabama and other places. Deficit, segregation, provider professional control, paper compliance. When the auditors come in, do they care about outcomes? No. Did you have a written plan? Does it have stuff that's measurable? Was it done within 1 year? Bingo. Thank you. Good job. Next. Okay? Get out of it. Compliance isn't what we are about. We are about outcomes. We want performance. We want accountability. And now I sound like a conservative. I want accountability to the taxpayer for the money that's being spent. What are we doing to make a difference? Babysitting? Not going to sell real well, particularly when it's very expensive. Okay, so that's the old system. Label, deficits, needs, standardized testing, whoopee-doo, all this stuff. Then we started to go to this. People first, capacities and gifts, gather folklore, and all of that, and see people in the context of their local community. Well, that's a lot nicer. And with that, if I can get somebody to pass out another piece, and this time you're all going to get to do a little reading. Oh, okay, Daryl. And this can go to, I don't know if there's enough for everybody. I only want the actual partners, class members, to read as we go around when I get to that section. This document called Beyond Programs, a Parable, was written by the late Mike McCarthy, a member of the USAID, Linda, at the University of Kansas City, okay? And this was written in 1989, okay? He passed in 2013. So again, this is 32 plus years ago that he wrote this. I'll read the intro, and then I'm going to ask each of you to read one line as we start up at this table. In the beginning, and I want you to hear the language, there was placement, and lo, we were happy when it happened, as placement was not mandated for adults who happened to experience severe disabilities. And so we said, this is good. And placement multiplied and filled the earth. And then we said, let us make programs which focus on serving clients. And clients were defined and labeled and grouped according to their labels and assigned to programs based on their labels. Sound familiar? And programs created services for each label, and state agencies developed unit costs for each service, and programs prospered and multiplied, and we said, this is very good. And as programs multiplied, a cry arose. Let us evaluate these programs to see how good they really are. And program evaluation, state regulations, quality assurance, compliant plans, and other program measures were created, and they multiplied and filled volumes. You can smile, Holly, it's okay. And in those times, a person who was a client, but who was also a prophet, and said, and whoever, I think, are you all in the class? Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll start here and just go around. Jenny, read the next line.
Okay. I don't want to be a client.
Next.
I want to be a person.
I don't want a label.
I want a name.
Next.
I'm gonna pass.
Okay.
I don't want services.
Okay.
I I want support and help.
Okay?
I don't want a residential placement.
You don't? Oh, you should be so grateful when we find a vacant bed 200. No, stop. That's it. That's your line. Thank you. Go ahead.
I want a home.
You want a home? Oh my God. Fantasy Island. Go ahead.
I don't want a day program.
Okay. Behind you.
I don't want to be uniform productive things.
Okay. Over here.
I just want my device to be programmed, not my life. Just I added that.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay. Rena?
I want to learn to do things I like and go places, which I like.
I'll be darned. Did everybody read one? Okay. I want to have fun, to enjoy life and have friends. I want the same opportunities as all of you. I want to be happy. Think about those powerful phrases, every one of them. Isn't that what all of us want? So here it was. And there was a long silence, and lo, everyone realized they must look beyond their programs. But they were troubled, and they asked, how can we do this? Would not each person need their unique own program and system of support and his own individual measure of quality? And the prophet replied, even as you say, so should it be done, just as you do for yourselves. Study this. This is a phenomenal one-pager about shift in attitude, shift in language, shift in expectations, and certainly the self-directed stuff we were talking about earlier. This is beautiful for that. So I share it with you because, again, I don't know how many people have seen it. I saw it a long time ago. I use it every place I do training. I weave it in no matter what the topic is, because it helps us get our own heads refocused, and we don't need to use the word client. That's a demeaning term, okay? How about person? How about the name of the person? We all have names, okay? I may be a client when I go see my attorney, maybe when I see my accountant. That's a very different kind of relationship. So I share that with you as something that I hope you will find helpful, and feel free to share it, copy it, or whatever. Okay. So let's go to IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. You've heard of it, okay? Just checking my notes. Okay. USC stands for US Code. Remember I said I'm going to give you the citation, so when you use this, it's not gobbledygook that you took from a bullet on a slide. You can use this in an IEP meeting. You can use this in a school board meeting. You can use it in the state legislature. I bolded it out. All children with disabilities have available free appropriate public education, prepares them for further education, employment, and independent living. Is that clear? Are those words clear? I think they are. USC is US Code. That's the translation of the IDE into federal codification. Okay? And look at this in 2004 when we amended the original 1975 law. Again, this is Congress in what's called findings. Most of you don't realize it, but in every federal law, there is a section called findings and purpose. What's the problem? What are we trying to do about it? States don't often do that, but in federal we do. Look at this beautiful language from Congress. This is not from the USEDS. This is not from TASH. This isn't from the avant-garde special ed researchers, okay? Implementation of this chapter been impeded by low expectations, insufficient focus on applying replicable research on proven methods of teaching and learning. Why did they write that? Because they had testimony from the experts who put the research on the table and showed it to them, and showed them the outcomes, and showed them the cost benefit of doing it right. Oh my God, if we do it right, we get a better bang for the buck. What a novel thought, okay? Almost 30 years of research demonstrated, and again, this is in the law. Have to have high expectations for these children, challenging expectations, like we do for all children. lead productive and independent lives to the maximum extent possible. Yeah, not everybody's going to become a Rhodes Scholar and go to college and get a PhD, nor is every neurotypical kid going to do that either, okay? And I came across this recently. Some of you may not remember Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I love both of these quotes. Reducing children to a test score is the worst form of identity theft we can commit in school. How do you like that one, counselor? Yeah, I mean, I just found that one a couple of weeks ago as I was putting these slides together, and it will now stay with me. That's what I do. And look at this. Strength lies in differences, not in similarities. My goodness, 2 people with Down syndrome are different. 2 people with cerebral palsy are different. 2 people with autism are different. 2 people who are 5'2" with blonde hair and blue eyes are different. That's important stuff, and Covey got it, but I love the labeling thing. Oh my Lord, that's beautiful. Okay? Transition, folks, is a journey. It's not a place or a program. We can't let that happen. That's what it is. It's too often you're going to the transition program, or we have a transition program over here. And I'll share with you personal stuff, because I do live in this world. When my daughter Dina was a sophomore in high school, and that was before we had the transition amendments, but pushy dad, this was in Colorado, and when I moved there to be the ARC Colorado exec, I could have lived anywhere in Metro Denver. I chose Littleton because they had the best reputation for special ed. People told me that's where you want to be. Okay, fine. Bought a house there right near the high school so Dina could go to school, meet the kids in the neighborhood, have real community. That stuff worked pretty good. So we go in at the end of her sophomore year for the IEP meeting, and Dina and I had spent a couple of nights the night before talking about what kind of work would she like to explore. And I don't know where she'd learn how to become mouthy, but okay. Gets her in trouble sometime, but me too. Anyhow, so we did that, and we're going through the usual stuff, and I finally said to the director, I said, okay, before time runs out, I'd like Dina to talk with you about what she'd like to be exploring in the world of vocation, employment, trying stuff out next year and the year after, 2 years before she graduates. And so she said, okay, Dina. And Dina starts going through her list. They haven't changed in her entire life. 3 core areas. Wanting to work with little children, because Dina is very nurturing, so childcare, teaching assistant. Working with animals, she's had dogs and cats, she loves to be around animals. Or working in an office arrangement. Okay? She lays those out, and again, all very doable and achievable. Okay? Anne says the following, it's embedded here, okay? That's why this slide is up here. Well, that's all very good, Dina, but that's not the way we do it here. We have a program. And the program is, guess what? We have a contract with a food service company. And you're going to learn how to work in a kitchen and cut and prepare food and packaging and all of that. And Dina, being shy and retiring, said, I don't want to do that. I don't like it. Dina's petite. She's got small hands. She said, I'm afraid of cutting myself if I'm going to be chopping. She knew what it involved. I don't want to do that. Next comment, these are direct quotes, and this is a PhD specialist in transition. Dina, we don't always get what we want in life. Okay? Now, true confession from Alan. I said, okay, I hear what Anne is saying, that was her name. Dina, you'll give it a try. Okay, school starts up in the fall. First week goes by, and then the phone rings in Alan's office. Hi, Alan, it's Anne. We're having troubles with Dina. Oh, really? Tell me what's going on. Well, she's throwing the food, she's cussing the supervisor, and whatever. It's okay, but wait a minute, I played the card at this point. And I said, what are you planning to do? What was she planning to do? Come on.
She's going to put her in a child working in a nursery.
Hell no. No, she was going to bring in the behavior management person to teach her to be compliant, because that's what we do. We're going to make you fit the program. At which point Alan said, "You are not going to do that, because if you do, we'll be in court." And she knew I had a good working relationship with James's counterpart in Illinois. I was the ARC Illinois exec, and we did heavy-duty advocacy because we had no providers in our system, so it was really kind of nice. And I said, what I expect you to do is figure out how to give her what she said she wants that she will excel in. So a couple of weeks went by. I get a phone call. We have a solution. Okay? I'm thinking, okay, what's the solution? Well, the other high school, 10 miles from here, on the other side of town, has something like what you're talking about. They have a guy over there who actually works with the students to help them find job or volunteer options while they're in high school and things they might like to do. So we're going to start busing Dina across town to go over there to go to high school. I said, excuse me, would you even do that to a, quote, neurotypical kid who knows no one from their neighborhood, put them on a bus and drop them into a 1,400-unit high school where they don't know anybody? Well, but that's where the service is. I said, good, bring the service to us. And she said, I don't think I can do that. Well, I said, then we'll be back to whatever. Somehow 2 weeks later, Jim showed up at Dina's high school and began to meet her. And 2 weeks later, she started volunteering in a child care center. She worked there 2 summers, and they hired her after she graduated, okay? Because she didn't want a program. She had her interests, her preferences, she declared them, and the system said, sorry, we don't do it that way. Don't ever let that happen. I'm happy to share it with you. It is a lesson I learned and would never do again. But I was a professional. I had heard, you know, you got to go through work adjustment and all that kind of junk. It's junk. There is no research on work adjustment training, none whatsoever. Okay. Okay, transition amendments. Look at this. Results. No more compliance. It's in the law. We're talking about results and outcomes, all right? Academic and functional. This is really important for those of you in the transition years or when you get there. That means, even though schools will fight it, not everything has to happen in the classroom. You can teach the kids, if you have public transit, how to ride the bus, how to go to the bank and open a bank account, how to shop in the real grocery store and not the make-believe grocery store with cardboard stuff and the Tom Thumb cash register and funny money. It doesn't transfer. It's not learning. It's compliance with a curriculum. So again, functional is really important here for a lot of students with disabilities, okay? And movement, school to post-school. Look at that, post-secondary ed, voc ed, integrated employment, supported. Oh my God, and we added in 2004 from the DD Act, strengths, preferences, and interests. Please get the message here. The deficit model is not in law. We're not denying disability. We're not saying some kids don't need speech-language therapy or PT, but that's not the center of the universe. The center of the universe is outcomes. Post-ed, voc ed, integrated employment, etc. And I don't see up there, I'm sorry, sheltered workshop. I don't see day services. I don't see group homes. I don't see ICFs. We don't need them. That's not the purpose of special ed. This is the goals, all right? And we even define it further. Employment, other post-school, functional voc eval, it just keeps going. And this is critical. The student must be at the center of their IEP meeting. Often, school districts say, they don't need to come. We know what they need. We know what they want. Have they ever asked them? No, but we sitting here as professionals, we know what you need. You need more of that. Yes, sir.
Say hi.
Hello.
Told me not to talk.
You got something to say? Comment?
Got something to say?
You're liking this? Okay.
He likes you.
Okay, thank you. All right, but this is important. This is the student's IEP. Give you an example from a partners class in Illinois 2 years ago. We also had a self-advocate helping on some of this stuff earlier. Her name's Tia Nellis. She's very active nationally. And Tia did a whole thing on Your student must go to their IEP. It's their meeting, blah, blah, blah. This mom, Corey, got it. She heard it again. And she went home. She talked with her husband. She talked with her son, who had never been, and he was already 11 or 12 years old, and said, okay, and his name is Seth. Seth's going to go to the next IEP. Seth uses an iPad for communication, not particularly verbal young man, but has a lot to say. So they walk into the IEP meeting. Mom didn't have to say, they were bringing him, but the staff were like, in a sense, saying, what the H is he doing here? Okay, because they didn't expect him. They were going to do their thing and say, have a nice day. So they sit and they do introductions, and I want you to hear this. And how much he wrote this versus his parents, or they did it together, it doesn't matter. Went around the table. Hi, I'm Seth. I'm here because I'm the expert on Seth. End of statement. Total silence in the room. Changed his IEP. He's now fully included in high school, and the word got out. This is a suburb called Glenview outside of Chicago. Upper middle class. Most parents hadn't done it. Every parent now brings their kid to the IEP. That school district is being transformed because this one mom got the message, thought it was worth trying. She's gone off, got her own career now. We got her hooked up with some national early childhood stuff. I don't know if you've heard the name Paula Kurth, one of the outstanding leaders in inclusion. She's at the University of Kansas. She met Corey. Corey has just written a chapter in Paula Kurth's newest book. Not a bad outcome for a partner's grad mom. So you never know. But anyhow, we've got to do this. This is a life planning for the person, not for the school district, not for the parents. That's why, sort of now what we did with Dina. Okay, now then there's this court case, 2017, Andrew F. out of Colorado. Similar school district to the one that I was involved in. Family put their kid in private school. They weren't happy with the public school. I don't know if you're familiar with this case. Okay, and they lost in federal district court, and they wanted to bring it to the Supreme Court. And I will tell you, the advocates, given the composition of the Supreme Court, were a little bit worried. And just like I told you before, I don't know why Justice Holmes wrote that opinion. We just found that out. I still would love to know why Chief Justice Roberts wanted to write this opinion. Does he have a family member with a disability? Is he somehow connected to special ed? None of us have been able to find out yet, but I would be willing to bet you there's something in his life that connects him, that he wanted to write this and write the strong language that he did. Because again, this is national, this is no longer Colorado, all right? So it went up there about what is the responsibility of the school district, and here in direct quotes, ladies and gentlemen, beautiful, okay? Merely more than de minimis. I love that term, that's legal jargon, sorry counselor, but de minimis would mean something like this in an IEP. Susie is currently reading, and she's 15 years old, at a 2.3 grade level on the wide range achievement test. Next year, we're going to get her as a goal to 2.4 on the wide range achievement test. I know that doesn't happen in any Alabama schools much. That's the kind of stuff we do, and it meets compliance. It is fully compliant. It's a measurable goal. And if you're lucky, you'll get there. Whoopee-doo. Is there any difference functionally? What I say in those IEP meetings, get from 2.3 to 6th grade level, that's functional reading. That'll make a great deal of difference for an adult. So think about reading or math, and is it useful? All right? So here's what he says, though. It requires an educational program reasonably calculated to enable to make progress, appropriate in light of the circumstance. So again, he's saying not every one of these kids is going to go to grad school and get a PhD, but you better be raising the bar. And I love the other one. The IEP is more than a form. Once again, he's slamming compliance. It's more than filling out the boxes and putting it in the file so the state auditor comes by, oh, yeah, we pulled 25 files, they've all got IEPs, and they meet the requirement, bingo, school district, you're fine, see you next year. Did it make any difference in the lives of those 25 students? Oh, we don't really care about that. Well, maybe we start caring about that and the outcomes. So again, very nice decision. All right, this comes, and you all can go Google and get your own, a transition guide written by the feds. It's almost 5 years ago now, but there's a lot of good stuff in here. All right? And starting to talk of measurable post-secondary goals, transition. Again, training, employment, education, independent living. Okay? It's all there, and it's really quite good. I don't think it's been updated. And now to the research side. Richard Luking has done, until he retired last year, 20 years of U.S. Department of Education funded research on transition and inclusion. Okay? Is it disseminated to school districts and states? No, and I don't know why, because it's as consistent as can be. He's written 2 books on it. Guy's wonderful. He just retired, otherwise I'd say bring him in here. He's not doing much anymore. He turned 70, he thought he got old. Look at this. This is what he gleaned from all of it. Youth empowerment, family involvement, academic prep with work experience, ancillary outside support, and work. He will tell you the best predictor of post-school employment is paid work while in high school. Pure and simple, non-controversial, non-debatable. The evidence is overwhelming, and I'll show some more in a minute. Okay? This here comes from a gentleman named Eric Carter, closer to you folks. He's at Vanderbilt. He is sort of the guru now in inclusion and transition. Look at these words. The best predictor of post-school outcomes are parental expectations and teachers' expectations. They change the path of experiences. And look at him. My words, his words. Changing introductions from deficits and what cannot do to strengths, preferences, interests, gifts, and contributions. Relationships matter, location matters, that's inclusion, okay? That's what we're talking about for all kids, regardless of significance, complexity of the disability, all right? And think about this in terms of people you know and people your age or older who didn't have inclusive opportunities, both neurotypical and not. And what do they believe? And what have they thought? And what stigma have they bought into? It's just the way it is. So I love Eric's stuff. Technology was added to the law in 1989. Increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities. The same definition is now in the DD Act, Special Ed, and the Rehab Act. This was originally the Tech Act. You've got a Tech Act program in the state. Please give this thought. Most professionals and many families don't get it yet. It's a luxury. It's a frill. Even aug communication devices are not anywhere near as common as they should be because school districts don't have speech-language pathologists who know anything about alternative augmentative communication, and so they're not telling people. They wouldn't know how to do an appraisal or an assessment, and if the family doesn't know it exists, it doesn't happen. I implore all of us, put technology on every annual plan meeting agenda. Low-tech, high-tech, customized tech, or whatever. And I give you a great example from a person I have unbelievable respect for in the employment field. This is in suburban Chicago. And she used to work for me, and now she's working for several other people. She does superb supported employment and now some customized and job development. Beautiful. And we meet a couple of times a year, just what's going on. She called me before the pandemic, Alan, I want to meet with you out at this Target store, got an issue. Okay, fine. So we meet, they have a coffee shop, I don't know if it was Starbucks, we're drinking coffee. And I said, okay, why are we here? So she says, we'll see over there. So I'm looking, aisle 7, okay? Aisle 7, there's a cashier checking out people, no visible stigmata, but obviously has a disability of some kind. And I'm watching him, very social, takes the items, puts them on the conveyor, bags them. I saw him make cash change for somebody else a credit card. So I said to her, okay, I'll bite. What am I missing here? Hang on. He's about to get fired. I said, wait a second. I saw what I thought was really good work. She said, it's not this part of the job, it's his breaks. Oh, tell me more. So, when they go on break, in at least that target, maybe it's true all over, it's staggered. So he closes his lane for 20 minutes to go to the break room. When he comes back, the person in the next lane closes so that there aren't a lot of lanes closed at the same time. That's how they do it in that store. But he's not allowed to have a cell phone with him. That has to go in his locker, so that was out. And when he goes in the break room, though, they have computers, and he gets caught up with games. He loves to do computer kind of games. Well, he's not alone, right? He loses track of time, and then he ends up coming late, or somebody has to tell him, get back to work, messes up the next person going, and whatever. So I said, okay, what are you going to do about it? Things haven't changed since Dina's time. And again, she's good. I'm going to bring back a job coach, and I'm going to get a behavior management person in here to help shape his time use. Okay. Now, I think you can tell I'm old enough that I'm not a superb techie. I know enough to be dangerous. So I said, come with me. And we walked over to the jewelry counter, and I'm looking around. And I said, this watch says it has an alarm clock on it. I don't think they'd object to that. I know he can't have his cell phone because we could use the phone alarm in that. And it's $39.95 or whatever it was. I said, I'm going to buy it because if you have to go through state compliance based on what you're telling me, he'll be out of here. So I said, let's buy it. I paid for it. I said, now you and the manager and other people can set it up because I don't have a clue how to do what needs to be done and if it's different times, different day or whatever. So I said, good luck. I hope it works out. If not, that's the best I can offer you. Here's the sad part. Bill called me the prophet. She looked at me like I was God. Technology was not on her list because she's a competent, board-certified rehab counselor professional who thinks about human services being done by professionals and paraprofessionals. That's how she's been trained. That's how we fund stuff and whatever. And again, I admire her, okay? And I'm a novice at this stuff to some extent. So I figured, okay, let's see what happens. She calls me a month later. I said, okay, how'd it go? She said, it worked wonders. Within 2 days, he was using the watch on time to take his break, when to come back. I said, great, so he's still working? She said, oh no, it's better than that. I said, what are you talking about? And I don't know if I had said to you, but it looked to me like he was really good at the customer service stuff and his smile and how he was handling the people in the lane. She said, yeah, he was so good that instead of being fired, he became the assistant director of customer service of the Target and got a $20,000 a year raise for a $40 watch. Okay, I share that with you because all of us need to be thinking about this stuff. And I'm not the guru on it, but just be sure whenever you're looking at somebody's support need, is there a piece of technology or a modification of a piece of technology that can enhance their self-determination, their independence, their control, and reduce the dependency on support, be it paid or non-paid? Okay? It won't always work, but we got to be thinking about it actively all the time. And I can tell you that's my favorite story, but I have many others, unfortunately, where it's not on the service coordinator's menu or case manager's menu when we're doing planning. They don't think about this kind of stuff. They haven't been trained. They don't know what it is. We've got massive training deficits. So that's my commercial on AT. And then here's a source that might be useful to you if you need to worry about where else we're going with all of this stuff with technology. Little company called IBM. You've heard of them? Okay, look at this, 1991. For people without disabilities, technology makes things easier. For people with disabilities, technology makes things possible. That's 31 years ago from IBM. shabby companies, kind of like an Einstein quote, not worth much, a lot. Okay? There's a whole Coleman Center, rights of people with cognitive disabilities to technology, inclusion, promote self. Again, you can look this up, the Coleman Centers, the institutes at the University of Colorado at Boulder. Okay? Affirm our commitment to equal rights, people with cognitive disabilities, technology, and information. Ah, yes, Voc Rehab. I had mentioned this earlier. 1992, the Rehabilitation Act was up for reauthorization. That happens fairly often in federal law. We take a look at it, what's working, what's not. Haven't done much of that in the last 10 years, but it was time for this one. And for those of you who may be old enough to remember, Voc Rehab prior to this, your state rehab agency, had 3 criteria. You had to have a disability. The disability had to be a barrier to employment. And 3, that Daryl, the counselor sitting at the desk when you came in to have your intake interview, had to look at you, maybe your records, and decide, were you feasible for employment? Translation, am I willing to spend some of my budget of my case service money for you, Alan, to go get a job? And he had all the power to be able to say, I don't think you're feasible, have a nice day, go do some other stuff, come back next year or 2 years from now, maybe you'll be ready then. Dr. Button, who's now at the Department of Labor, and I were the Government Relations Department at United Cerebral Palsy at this time. We were aware of many people who had been told they weren't feasible, but through their own networking and relationships, managed to get jobs, and sometimes good jobs. So this was pre-computer. This was fax days. We did some fax distributions across the country, across categories. It wasn't just CP. Are there people out there who have a letter saying, you're not feasible from Daryl for employment, but now are working and have a good job and would be willing to testify, bring the letter, and bring a paycheck? 2 weeks. 400 people contacted us from across the country. UCP, ARC, Agency for the Blind, whatever. It was just amazing. And we knew there was some. I didn't realize how appalling it was. So again, we talked earlier about the invitations. We looked at who were the people on that committee, and we pulled people from their state because they were their voters, their constituent. And we got them invited. And there were going to be a total of 5 witnesses, cross disability. So first person gets up, does their thing, hands out their letter and their paycheck, and you could see the committee was moved. The second person was a person with multiple disabilities, but communicated effectively and did his story, the first was a woman, and had the letter passed up and the paycheck. At that point, I thought most of the members of the committee were ready to kill the state and federal rehabilitation agency. And they said publicly, we're confused. This is an agency funded to help people like you get jobs. They determined you couldn't, and on your own you've gotten it, and they threw you out. And that was the language they used. The law was changed the next week. That third eligibility was taken out, and here's the piece you need to know, because it's being violated every day in most states. The law now says people are presumptively eligible. Presumptively. That means the burden of proof is now on them, okay, of gainful employment in integrated settings. So we're not talking presumptively for sheltered workshop, nickel-dime junk. No, real jobs, real pay, okay? Unless there is clear and convincing evidence. I'm not an attorney. Mr. Tucker can correct me, but my understanding is that's a fairly high civil judicial standard. It is not an IQ score or a DSM mental health diagnosis or a diagnosis of cerebral palsy or somebody being nonverbal or spastic or whatever. It's evidence that says we've tried some stuff and you're not employable. I will tell you, with customized employment today, on the mental health side, if you know people with serious mental illness, something called IPS, Individualized Placement and Support, here you hear it, 0 reject, 0 failure when done with fidelity. Okay? So they're not going to be able to do this and meet this standard. But are they doing it? Sure. They're just telling people. Okay? And here's the outcome in regulations, CFR is code, federal regulation. This is now 21 years old. Look at that. We've got the DD Act language that now is in special ed, invoke rehab for their plan. Strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, interests, and informed choice. That's what I'm trying to share with you. The alignment across the federal government funding today is 100%. There is no deficit model. There is no medical model. There is no fix the broken person. And again, I'm not denying disability, but it doesn't define you. Those are the things that define each of us, with or without a disability. So that's where we have to be, and wait till you see a little bit more coming. All right, and here's a great philosophical discussion of what's informed choice. All in our hands, our hearts, and our minds. Wow, pretty powerful. And look at this. This was in here, Holly, but you'll appreciate this one from our discussion last night at dinner. I don't know how many of you are familiar with something called National Core Indicators, but it's a project done by the state DD directors in a place called Human Services Research Institute, and they go in periodically to states and they do interviews and they pull files looking for certain issues. Here was the one on choice, and you can see in the far left, only about 15% of people that year, 12-13, had paid jobs. It's gone up a little bit. They then asked this very simple question to 243,000 people. Did they want a job or not? Which isn't quite enough to really find out, but okay. 47% said they did. Then they went and looked at their personal plans, and of the 47%, only 30% had a job goal. Why do you suppose that was? Come on. Case manager, service coordinator had no expectation, didn't even ask the question. Okay? So I can condemn every part of our systems. The gap in knowledge and education, stuck in culture, tradition, stigma, low expectations, is all over the place. That's what your job is going to be about in systems change, individually and collectively, to raise the bar that every person with a disability can have meaningful lives and outcomes if the supports and services are tailored and appropriate and done with fidelity, not sabotaged. Not, I took a webinar and I know how to do it now, because then they screw it up and say, see, we told you, you really can't work, go back to the day program.
Milestones program.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things to be done, and some states are doing it. All right, supported decision making. We're going to talk about that more later, but I wanted to give you a little background, sent you out several pieces on this beyond what you already had, because this is hot stuff right now. A number of states have passed laws, and hopefully Colby's this year or next year maybe will become it in this state. But it starts with believing guardianship is the most restrictive intervention, okay, from the UN Convention, all right? Getting access to whatever is needed, and I was mentioning earlier that Jonathan Martinez, who was the lawyer who started this with the Jenny O case in Virginia probably 10, 12 years ago, is a superb trainer, but he does this beautiful thing for all of us. He said, we all use supported decision making. We just don't call it that. Okay, and in the room he would ask, and I'll ask you, how many of you have a financial advisor or a planner if you have any kind of investment portfolio? Yeah? Are you incompetent? You need somebody to make the decision for you? No, but you need guidance because it's complex stuff. In the old days, how many of us used to go to a travel agent to get suggestions about itineraries for trips or how to get package pricing? That's supported decision making. I love the analogies because we all do it, and then all of a sudden it's not fancy jargon from the disability world. All of us do this. How many of you, sometimes when you go to a doctor's appointment, bring somebody with you to help untangle the jargon? My wife, who's very bright, thank the Lord, 23 years ago experienced breast cancer. That was pretty traumatic kind of stuff. She asked me, not that I wouldn't have gone anyhow, to please go with her to every doctor visit to make sure we were hearing, I could speak stuff back, try to ask for clarification, because her emotions were caught up in it. Had nothing to do with incompetency, it's just that other filters were at work. Okay, I didn't have her healthcare power of attorney, but I was there as a support for her to make sure we got all the questions answered and got stuff done, and I'm thrilled to tell you she had to have surgery. It was rapidly metastasizing. She had radiation therapy, not done much better now, and chemo, but she's alive and healthy, no recurrence 22 years later, because we got first-class stuff done, and I think in part it's because we did it together and made sure all the questions were answered. We got several opinions on each piece. We didn't just take that one because somebody said go to that doctor or go to that clinic or whatever. And that was my role. But I didn't call it supported decision making. I called it being a good partner. Okay? So whatever you call it, don't get caught up in the jargon that this is new disability stuff. It's just a framework that Jonathan created to help us get an understanding of what we're talking about, okay? And every person has got preferences and opinions. It may take a while to find out what they are. You may have to get to know them a little better. And then our job in supported decision making is to help them get what they want, not to decide for them, well, Dina, too bad you don't get what you want, go do food service. No. Okay? It's not a trend, it's for real, okay? And again, you've got to figure out for each person, and there could be several different people who assist in different categories of need, and that's okay. Doesn't have to be just one. And again, start this for sure in transition planning. Support the student while they're there to express their preferences of what they want. And guess what? If the first thing doesn't work, what's the old line? Try and try again. Okay? How many of us have tried stuff that didn't work? It's part of life. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. And we don't allow that to happen to people with disabilities because they have to be safe. Well, part of learning. Instead, we create learned helplessness, and that's not very good either. Okay, so then we get into self-determination. And again, people with more self-determination are more independent, more integrated, healthier, and better able to recognize, oh, other than that, why would we want to do it? I mean, this is research. This is clinical research that people's lives are better in all dimensions when they have more control. Here, back to the transition stuff, is the clear and convincing evidence even on transition, and there it is from the feds. Highest standard civil system of law, high degree of certainty. Clear means unequivocal. Good luck proving that. We've defined significant disability in the Rehab Act, okay? So when they tell you, oh, well, that's not you, yeah, that's you. And this is the other one. If you're on SSI or SSDI, you're presumed eligible. You don't have to go through all that bureaucratic stuff, okay? You're in, unless they have the evidence to say you can't work. Good luck. And here's data for some of you who may be like I am. I like to get the data to back it up. Dr. Chimera is an economist, PhD. He works in a rehab environment, but his background is economy and economics, not rehab counseling or job development. So he looks at data, and when I first met him, I said, wow, this is really good stuff. And he said, Alan, I'm a numbers guy. I'm glad the numbers came out the way you like them and my colleagues do. If they came out differently, that's what I'd publish also. I said, great, and we'd burn it. No, can't. So look at this about the difference between starting at 14 and 16. For those of you who are parents and have kids who are adolescents, this is kids on the autism spectrum. I'll show it to you in a minute on ID. Now, the numbers go down because of the recession, but even in '09, look at the advantage by starting 2 years earlier. 69 kids got jobs versus 52. Folks, that's statistically significant. We're not talking rounding error. Why wouldn't every school district, every board of education want to start kids at 14? They're going to have better outcomes to report for themselves, to the state, to the taxpayer. Most of our kids are graduating and they're going to work, or our kids with disabilities. These are win-wins, and I sit here and sometimes I want to sit down with school board members and say, can I have a backroom session with you off the record and get you to wake up about money and what you could be doing instead of babysitting? Which costs a lot of money too, by the way. Okay, here are the numbers for ID. Still, massive difference. Look at that. Okay, age 14, 74 kids. Age 16, 58. That's 16 more kids who get to go to work if you start 2 years earlier. That's powerful stuff in people's lives. Okay, and Rob's published. Okay, and then we go to more bipartisan stuff. This is more recent. Look at the vote, and I put it up there. When Congress can agree on certain things, even in the current environment, we get almost 100%. Everybody thought employment's a good thing, including for people with disabilities. Left, right, center, in between. Look at that, 95-3, 415 to 6, all right? And I'll show you the transition language is probably not happening in your state, I'm sorry to say. Customized employment was formally added in the law. We clarified supported employment, and look at that second bullet. 50% of your state VR agency's supported employment money, and that's a separate fund, has to be spent on youth with the most significant disabilities from 14 to 24, and they can even extend supports for 4 years. Why did Congress do that? Come on. Why'd they do that? Come on.
Because they need to keep, some people need a longer.
Yeah, but why did they say half the money is going to go to the adolescents and young adults? They want to change the trajectory. They don't want them living in poverty the rest of their life, dependent on the government dole. They've read the research. They've heard it. This is the law. Voc Rehab must spend half of its supported employment federal dollars on 14 to 24-year-olds. Okay, are they doing it? In most states that I've checked in, very few. Very few, because nobody's on their back, including the feds, I'm sorry to say. Okay, and here's another reason why from Dr. Carter. Only 26% of students with intellectual and multiple disabilities employed 2 years after high school. So guess what? They're on SSI, they're on Medicaid, maybe they're on food stamps, and if they're lucky, they get a slot in a waiver, and then they get to go to a day program or a group home at some point for $50,000 to $70,000 a year for the rest of their life. Let me give you a sense of numbers. Connecticut is a very high spending state, so I like to pick on them. This is 5 years ago. The average cost for a person on their DD waiver 5 years ago, you ready? $90,000 per year. So I want you to think about this as taxpayers. Come in at 25, you get lucky, you get off the wait list, and you'll see pretty soon people are living good lives now. So live to be 75, 50 years at $90K a year is $4.5 million that the state and the federal government went on the hook for that one person, and the next person coming in, and the next person coming in. And is it any wonder there's waiting lists in most states? No, because we're not focused on outcomes and reducing dependency. We're promoting it, and that doesn't even include their regular Medicaid costs and some of the other costs. That's just the waiver costs, okay? And we throw around those numbers like they're chump change. They're not. Customized employment, I hope you'll get to know more about it. You did have some time with Stephen Hunt. But again, strengths, needs, and interests. It works very, very well. And it started with this guy. Did Stephen show Mark's picture? This is Mark Gold, okay? Hippie, PhD, University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. And again, here's the tragedy, folks. I knew this man. He was taken from us at 52 years of age with Hodgkin's lymphoma and turned it over to Michael Callahan, who's done wonderful work. This man was amazing. Michael's been here, yeah. He's right next door. He's over in Mississippi. He's retiring, though. But the bottom line is, Mark Gold, and I want you can go Google it and find it, in, let me see now, the late 70s, published a total of 5 or 6 journal articles, which mean they had to meet a standard of science and all that. IQ has no correlation with economic productivity. When you use systematic instruction and task analysis, he had people working, putting together electronic circuit boards at the IBM factory in Austin, Texas. And he actually helped the engineers redesign the board with his task analysis to make it easier even for their workers. Okay? So task analysis and systematic instruction work, and you see him doing it here with the old bicycle brake, for those of us who remember the two-wheel bikes with our pedals as opposed to up here. He worked in his dad's bike shop. That's where he got the task. Okay? 13 different assembly parts, and you do it one way, no, try another way. And with that, this gentleman is at Dixon State School in Illinois, totally blind, allegedly significant intellectual disability, and my understanding is this is the photo, but within 20 minutes, this guy had it down cold. And he was labeled, not even considered for sheltered work, let alone real work. Well, we do that with a lot of people. My stepdaughter, Mindy. I'll talk about her maybe in a little bit. So, this is Mark's legacy, and APSE, which I'm a proud member of. Employment is the preferred outcome for publicly funded service. And this is the motto of this national organization. And there's a chapter in this state. And so the question for all of us is, why do you work? For those of us who work, why should people with disabilities seek competitive integrated employment? Why should people with disabilities not work and not be expected to work? Think about that. People who work, why do you work? Somebody.
Social. friendship.
Pardon me?
Social.
Social, yes. Why?
Oh, because social.
Social, okay. Anybody else?
Social like
Why do you work?
Paycheck.
Paycheck? I'll be darned. Yeah, that's important. Okay.
Because I love what I do.
You have a purpose. You have a mission. That's part of it too. Okay, any other reasons people work?
Yes, interest?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Transportation.
Transportation. Say more.
I say transportation and independent living.
Okay, big things, right? Yeah, absolutely. So, there's, okay, and then think about it. This is why we should be doing it for people with disabilities. All the same reasons. Make a contribution, feel good about yourself, okay? Social, as somebody said. Yeah, money. Money is important, okay? Opportunities to learn. The continuum is a myth. I don't have time to go through all of this. There is not one piece of research that supports moving from a day program to sheltered work, to a work group or a work crew, to a supported job, to a this job, and eventually a real job. Okay? 2 studies, Oregon, Washington, big up at the front here, Bellamy and Mank, looked at Washington and Oregon State over 20 years. If you came out of high school, hang on to this one, at 21, and they looked at the trend lines, how old do you think you were when you got your first real job? If you went through the continuum of care, which is a medical model, by the way. They did the research in the mid-'80s, so they looked at from 70 to 85. Just get, you wish, 67.2. They debunked it. We had set up criteria that were irrelevant, and there's been research after research that we set such high expectations that are not what entry-level employers are looking for. Colorado did a study. 19 of the 21 providers, hang on to this one because I was there at the time, said an exit criteria to go to work, you ready? You had to be able to balance a checkbook. What's that have to do with getting a job? Any more than in Pennsylvania, being able to talk, walk, or use the bathroom to learn, okay? Not one employer had stuff like that. All the sheltered workshop day programs had criteria here to graduate. All the entry-level employers were here. They never talked to them. They just made up these notions of what it took. So again, we created this stuff on a medical model. Well, until you get better and graduate, you can't go to box 2. And then you'll go to a less restrictive, and you'll go here, and you'll step down. Think about all the language in hospitalization. You do step down and whatever. It doesn't apply to any of our work. Don't get conned. So we'll look at Dr. Chimera again on supported and sheltered employment. And you can look at his numbers here. This is now over 10 years old. Okay, SE, supported employment, SW, sheltered work, and he looks at all the different numbers, all right, and you can see that sheltered work's a lot more expensive, and return on the investment, regardless of disability or severity, supported employment has a better return on investment than sheltered work. How many people know that in Alabama? How many people know that in most other states? This is real stuff published in journals, okay? No value added. This is all Rob's stuff. Autism, the same thing. And yet, look at this. Where have we gone over the decade? Not much in integrated employment, but a lot in day. And now we get to you guys. Yay. Now we're going to stretch. All right, this is from the Institute on Community Inclusion, University of Massachusetts, Boston, John Butterworth, and that whole crew. Look at the national average, this is pre-pandemic, 21% of all the people on DD services are employed or getting employment services. Your state and North Carolina, 17. You can see some of the neighboring states here are doing better than you. And you can look up top to Washington, 85, Oklahoma, 66. Oregon and Rhode Island have bumped up a lot because they both have federal court cases under the ADA. I'll be darned. And they're under court settlement agreements to increase competitive integrated employment. Washington State's very different. I know, Washington State has people who aren't as disabled as people in Alabama, right? And they have more employers who say, come on down, we want to hire you. And if you believe that, there's a ship leaving from the port tomorrow for Washington State. No. Why? Because they had leadership in the state DD agency. She's now retired. She fought the ARC. She fought providers. She had seen the data. Hang on to this one, Daryl. She got the legislature to agree and to amend their adult waiver. When you enter the adult waiver in Washington State as a person with a developmental disabilities, you can't say, I don't want to work or explore work. Oh, we're depriving people of choice. No, we're not. We know what works. You must spend 9 months in an employment track, job training and tryout, volunteering, discovery and customized, and whatever. And you can't say, I want to go to day program. Not allowed. And guess what? By the time they get through, most people like the idea of working in a paycheck. I'll be darned. And they want to keep working. Okay? But it took leadership from a state director who had seen the research and said, why are we wasting money? And she won. She's now retired, Jane Boone. But the thing is, that's the law. So guess what? If parents know that and your kid's in high school, you think you're going to fight a little harder on the transition plan to have some employment stuff in it? Of course you are. Yeah. No? No. Okay. But anyhow, you can see the wide disparity here across the country. Okay? And if we get into this even at a bigger level about people working or seeking work, it's called participation in the workforce. Don't buy the unemployment number, very misleading. You can see that generally speaking, 77% of people without disabilities are either working or looking for a job. When we look across disability, about 34%. When we get into mental disability, which includes mental illness and TBI, 25%, and when we get down to cognitive disability and SSI, the best number is about 12. So what that means is 88% of adults with a cognitive disability on SSI are neither working nor looking for employment, therefore lifelong poverty and dependency. Bad outcome, okay? And then here you win a prize, right with my home state. This is the day services, facility-based, segregated. US average 37, and you're at 86 with those of us in Illinois. That means most folks, if they're not working or when they're not working, are in a segregated day program. Whoopee-doo. But look at again, Washington, Oklahoma, Vermont, New Hampshire, and California. Nobody. If they're not working, they're in meaningful day, doing stuff they want to do and having a good time, and maybe they're volunteering, they're in various social clubs. We know how to do this. It isn't unique that there are things in those states different about the population. It's different about the approach, it's different about funding, it's different about the law interpretation, okay? So once again, let's go back. Plato. Each citizen should plan his part in the community according to his individual gifts. There's no new ideas. He had it way back then, okay? Everybody's got some, okay? I'm not going to read this to you. You've got it. This is the law of competitive integrated employment definition from 2014. This is the only thing Voc Rehab can pay for as an outcome. That's it, okay? Same pay, similar occupations, interaction, integrated, and opportunities for advancement. That's another thing we've done. The law has moved from job placement to career. And now we talk about people having a career profile. And again, you can see some of this. This is other research about what works. And there's mental health benefits and personal well-being. And there's 4 different studies summarized, okay? All fairly, not too old. That what work does for people, kind of confirming the things we've talked about. These are different ways, apprentices, internships, all work. And then we got these guys, Medicaid. This isn't the settings rule. We'll get to that in a few minutes. This is 2011, where they wrote some guides on employment. I was telling James last night, I have been involved in Medicaid since 1981. I never thought I would see language like this from the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Never, okay? This is value propositions. Look at this. They want to emphasize employment, support states' effort to increase employment and meaningful, and wait till you read this language. 2011, work is a fundamental part of adult life. How come your Medicaid agency hasn't read this? How come the DD agency hasn't read this? Sorry. Meaningful work has been associated with positive physical and mental health benefits, part of building a healthy lifestyle as a contributing member of society. I bolded it out. All individuals, regardless of disability and age, can work, and optimally with opportunity and training and support. Building, here it is, they got the same language, stealing the language. Each person's strengths and interests. Folks, that's as good as it gets. Every major disability law and regulation is saying the same thing, using the same core values. That's why I want you to start to internalize these. Think about these when you're talking to each other, to legislators, to school board members, to employers. Think high, good expectations, positive language. This is beautiful stuff, and it gets even better before we're done, but okay? And then here's data, if you want it, from Iowa. This is pre-post data, and it was done by the University of Iowa with the state agency, and they looked at the claims before and after people went to work for a lot of people with disabilities, okay? You can see that the costs went down. They saved $20 million in 2 years. How much is that? 20 million. Because their health costs, mental health costs, and medication costs went down. We may say work is stressful. Non-work is a lot more stressful. A lot more. Okay? And here again, Dr. Galen, early, employment is nature's best physician, essential to human happiness. Thank you, the boat's leaving for Seattle. Okay, folks, there it is. Again, these are not new ideas. Employment is good for your self-esteem. It's good for your health. It's good for your mental health. It's good for your family. It's good for your community. There are no losers here except traditional providers, and I'm sorry, that's their problem, not ours. Okay? Okay. So that's a lot of stuff, but I hope you see the message is clear, it is consistent, and it really cuts across all of the places that we're talking about. And I've got to look here. Hold on a minute. Wow. Okay. 5 after. Take a 2-minute stretch. We don't have time for a break, but I want you to just stretch for a minute or two, and then we'll go through, finish. Certified by Virginia Commonwealth University, and there's another one from Cornell University. I forget the acronym. Those are the only 2 legal credentials you want to have working with you. Okay, so quickly in here, future, present. Again, what I like to do is say all this federal stuff is also in alignment with the major DD voluntary associations. From their website, this is the ARC of the US. Fully supports full inclusion and participation. Not bad. Doesn't mean they always do it. And this is mission, not vision. Vision is 5-year worth. So we're on that page. UCP, productivity, full citizenship, life without limits, same page. Autism Society, meaningful participation, I mean, you can read it. We're all here, everybody in the voluntary sector, in their mission or vision, is saying the same thing that the law says. This is self-advocates. You've got the full page from the Collaboration to Promote Self-Determination. Again, beautiful stuff here. You could spend the day reading that one piece of paper. All right, let's go to the ADA real quick. Look at the vote there. Look at that vote. Nearly unanimous in the House and the Senate. Why? Because we had Democrats and Republicans involved from day one, and enough of them had disability or disability-related experiences in the House and the Senate that they wanted to pass a big civil rights law. Those 4 goals are for everybody, not only for some people, and they're in line with everything else we're saying. This is 1990. I wanted you to see this. Remember I talked about findings and purposes? Look at that. This was in 1990, Congress says, this unnecessary discrimination and prejudice cost the United States billions of dollars in unnecessary expenses from dependency and non-productivity. This is Congress again. This isn't an ideologue. This isn't the USEDS. This isn't TASH. This is Congress saying that's why we're doing a civil rights law. Let's get people working and contributing. Okay? And look at the money here, folks. We have passed $1 trillion in people with severe disabilities with SSI, SSDI, Medicaid, or Medicare. Even at the federal level, $1 trillion is big money. Okay? And I mentioned this earlier. This is real. Good news. People with DD are living longer. Okay? Into their 60s and 70s. Very different from when I started. But if they live longer and they're totally dependent, we got a real problem of runaway costs. So we got to deal with this stuff. And the integration mandate, and this is Code of Federal Regulations, most integrated setting. Okay, in the Olmstead case, I hope you've covered that before. They agreed, thank you, Justice Ginsburg. It's a civil rights law. I don't know if you've seen this, of Lois Curtis, the artist, and the woman in the sort of lavender dress. James, I don't know, have you met Sue Jameson? Yeah. She's been over here too. Yeah, she's wonderful. She represented them in the federal lawsuit at the district level and at the Supreme Court, and we got it 6-3, and the whole story of this young lady, Lois, in and out of psychiatric and DD facilities, and once they got her into an appropriate community support and services, her talent as an artist took off. Here she's presenting a gift to President Obama. She's got her own shop now. She's got her own art gallery, and her life would have been destined to chronic institutionalization without the ADA and Olmsted and Sue's brilliant work, and Justice Ginsburg hearing it. Okay, most integrated setting, you can read these. It's a shame we have to write rules to explain what we mean by segregation. Okay, daytime, okay. Again, language from the feds, suing in Oregon. This is 8 self-advocates who wanted jobs, and the state of Oregon said, sorry, you have to go on a wait list, stay in the sheltered workshop. It took quite a few years to fight this one out, and I showed you the Oregon numbers are now way up because they agreed on a 7-year settlement, and they had to move people out of sheltered work and not refill the spaces. They had to guarantee transition kids. And then here's a wonderful quote from your neighboring Tennessee. Your new waiver is somewhat modeled after the Employment Community First Choices from Tennessee. Self-disclosure, I helped co-author that with Dr. Lisa Mills, 2015-16. But this is the director of managed care. Oh, they're evil. No, Patty's not evil. She's a mom. Her daughter passed away several years ago, experienced cerebral palsy. This is beautiful, and she said this at a congressional briefing. Okay? We cannot literally afford, morally or financially, to ignore employment as the most vital civil right. It can't get better than that. Okay? Here's self-advocate. Here's data from 200 employers done several years ago by an HR firm knowing nothing about disability. They got these findings. They're all good, okay? Look at this, data, if we need it. Beautiful stuff. And the relationship between productivity being a little bit under 80%, they were willing to trade off for all that other good stuff like dependability, engagement, motivation, all of that, okay? Housing, okay? Real quick. There's community living. This is the federal position. Everybody able to live where they choose, with the people they choose, fully participate. You are on the good state list now of 15 states, nobody in a state institution, okay? These supported living principles, I'm not going to read them to you, study them. What I want you to see is where they came from. Whoops. Gary Smith was the assistant director of the National Association of State Developmental Disabilities Directors, okay? Gary represented the 50 states in creating this and working with legislation called Community Supported Living Act of 1990, which now allows all states to separate housing from supports, and 42 states have done that, and some do it a little bit and some don't do it. But basically, this definition of supported living came from the trade association, from the 50 state DD agencies. Not that others hadn't been doing it, but they lobbied for this to go into law, okay? It's not this. And here's the research, okay? 50 years, okay? No surprises here. Who you live with, what you do is important. And again, bless you, you guys do fairly well on this. What's the percentage of people living 3 or fewer, which is the magic number. And you're like over here, I know I pulled it up earlier, but you're at about 60%. But your 3 or fewer, if I understand correctly, are still mostly in group homes as opposed to supported living. So, but a lot easier to move from a 3-person group home to supported living than a 6 or 8 person like my home state. And here we can see where you are. You can see who the states are at the top of the list. And they all vary in composition, but this is a good news thing for you. And you can see states with big institutions have also the largest number of people in large settings. Okay, and here is where we're going to quickly end. CMS put out in 2014 final rules for settings and person-centered planning beyond what I showed you in 2011. Okay? Setting integrated, full, and there's employment again, access like everybody else. Informed choice. This is really important again for case managers. That means you got to get a chance to discover and explore. If your life has been sheltered and you have been protected, and somebody says, Carolyn, would you like to keep doing what you're doing or do this? What are you probably going to say?
I've been doing.
I'm going to stay with what I've been doing because I don't know what this is. But if I take you and say, let's go look at this and let's go look at that, and oh, I think I'd like that. That's informed choice. It is being sabotaged across the country with just a simple question. And that's a farce. That's not informed choice. It needs to be expressed. And so it's been defined that this has to happen and that the time has to be devoted to do this. All right? This is all in the regs or guidance about this. Here are the things people ought to be doing during the day just to get your mind thinking other than day program. All right? Lots of things, lots of stuff, including spirituality in the place of their chosen faith, not the church or place of worship that's around the corner from the group home. Thank you very much, for it's convenient for the staff. Okay? Again, look at this. This is the CMS template. They trust me enough. I've bolded some things. Okay? Person-centered planning, driven by the person, time, location, convenient. Look at this. Choices to the individual, what's important. Strengths, preferences, needs are in the formal final rules from the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services on a required annual person-centered plan. How many of your case managers know how to do that? Based on what I've heard, including the dinner last night, very few, if any. So again, you're in flagrant violation of federal regulation, and who's getting shafted? Them? No, the person with a developmental disability. All right? Goals, relationships, it's all here. I didn't write any of this, I just bolded it out. I've given you the Partners in Policymaking core values. They're consistent with everything we've been talking about today, but look them over. Those are from Dr. Wick if he didn't give them out to you. Here's another thing I showed you earlier about informed choice, and we're coming down. We got to change the whole design or we're never going to have enough money. We got to talk outcomes, efficiency, equity, fairness. Oh, sorry, I thought I changed the Illinois figure. My apology. No, yours is less. Yours is like 65, I think. Okay. This is what we got to be talking about. And somebody talked about transformational, I think Eric did earlier. We got to transform. That means stuff really ends up looking different. And here's Heraclitus, older than me, 535 BC. The only thing constant is change. We need to recognize that's part of our life. And even with everything I've given you today in best practice, guess what? It's probably going to change in the next 3 to 5 years. We'll have customized employment 0.2.4. We'll have supported living 5.7. Keep our eye on the person, their preferences, strengths, interests, and what strategies do we have to achieve those outcomes. Because if we get stuck, they'll get stuck in the next wave, and that's not acceptable. And then we got to get rid of the mythology. Thank you, President Kennedy. And we got to change this. We are doing it. Move to high expectations. You've seen this before. And Mr. Lincoln said it. Look at this. You can't help people permanently by doing for them what they could and should do for themselves. Wow. It's about the dignity of risk. It's allowed. Okay? And J.K. Rowling came up with this one at Harvard. I guess it must be okay. Oh, typo. Not have lived at all, you fail by default. Okay, we're allowed to fail. It's allowed. Okay, so let's get to the outcomes and language. We'll get into this a little bit later too. I cannot stress to you the power of your words and not what you're saying, but what people hear. That's what this man has taught us. Their filters aren't the same as yours, and we'll get into it later. But please use terms of dignity and respect. I know some people are proud to say I'm autistic, fine, but when I talk about it, I'm going to talk about people with autism. That's fine. Just remember, if you're saying it, what does it mean to the person hearing it? Okay? Vulnerable, oh my God. Those are the pictures we want to see. You've got the 3 laws that say this, and this is where we close it, folks. This says every one of us, whenever we join the club, this is what we want. Okay, this is Bob Dole's coming through in a different way. Your rights are your rights, and you want to be part of life. So get involved, get engaged, fight for the things you care about. There it is again. And Mr. Collins, yeah, this is, Eric said this earlier. Got to get the actions going, okay? And Mr. George, look at this. Purpose, true to their core values. This is about us. He was doing it in a different world, but it works for us. And let us get back to this. Thank you, President Bush and Congress. Now that's what we got to work on. Whew. Fast run. Thank you. Thank you. Whew. And now we'll go from big picture into 2 bills in the state legislature. Mr. Tucker. Whew. Oh, I didn't do my other plug. I'm sorry. On the settings rule while he's coming up. ADAP on this Medicaid settings rule has got a webinar coming up, a Zoom info session, 5:30 this Tuesday, March 15th. I urge you all to be part of it because you have a chance to make comment on your state transition plan. You've now got the language from the settings rule and the person-centered planning. Listen at this and send your comments in. They have to be processed. Sorry.
Thanks for the plug, Alan, and thanks for the afternoon. It's an incredible session. I think we are incredibly fortunate in the state of Alabama to have you here visiting with us. Many, many, many thanks. I have not had the chance to join partners in the last couple of months, so I'll introduce myself briefly. My name is James Tucker. I'm the director of the Alabama Disabilities Advocacy Program. That's ADAP. My colleague, Nancy, many of you have met. I'm incredibly fortunate to be able to work with her and to be able to work with the 2 other members of the DD network in the state. But to keep it moving, you saw on the agenda that the next task is to look at a couple of bills that are pending in the state of Alabama legislature. Alan wants us to do this little exercise tonight so that we can make choices about how we will focus and spend our time tomorrow. So Alan had to ask me a couple of weeks ago to kind of survey what's going on in the state legislature. And I will just say at the top that while you could read a disability or a civil rights question into many things, this is not an especially active session in our state legislature this year for disability rights issues. With that said, when Alan and I talked last weekend, it was relatively easy to kind of quickly boil down some choices. So we're looking at 2 primary choices tonight, and I am going to ask Kim and Colby Spangler to say a word about one of the 2 choices. One of the bills is named the Colby Act. It would facilitate or allow the possibility of supported decision making in Alabama. Essentially what that means is it's a mechanism that is an alternative to traditional ways of making formal decision making, guardianship, conservatorship, power of attorney. All of those are valid and have their place, but essentially this is to ask the state legislature to create and give approval to supported decision making as a concept in Alabama. Do you guys now have a mic? Can you describe the bill?
Thank you very much. I'm Kim,
I'm Colby.
and we are here to. Oh, look at this. Y'all are on the ball. We are here to help answer any of your questions and describe the Colby Act. So I think all of you know what supportive decision making is, and Dr. Burbing described it perfectly. It's something we all already do. So I'll describe it to you this way. If you can imagine yourself not having a choice in what you woke up to wear every day, not having a choice in who you get to live with, not having a choice in what you eat, not having a choice in where you go, what you do, whether you work or not, that would effectively describe the lives of many, many, many people living in a group home who have a guardian. And that's not because they have guardians who are mishandling anything. It's because the people at that level are making decisions for them, and in many cases, the guardians are completely unaware of that. And so, when I came to realize that in the event of Steve and I's, my husband's name is Steve, Colby's dad, unfortunate passing, that it could possibly be a situation that Colby would face one day, we became very adamant on finding a way to make sure that that didn't happen. And that's when we came across supported decision making, because there are so many people, so many people in our state with a disability, whether it's intellectual, physical, cognitive, developmental, whatever you want to call it, who not only deserve to make their own decisions, but easily could with the right support. So that's what we're here to do. And I'm going to ask Colby to describe to you real quickly what the Dream Team means to him and how he uses it. Dream Team. What it means to you and how you use it. He's thinking about it.
I don't know.
Tell him who's on your Dream Team and how you use the Dream Team and the support.
Kim Spinner helped me with independent living skills. My dad helped me with employment. Amy Waddy and Scott Waddy helped me with safe and scary. Little Round helped me with spiritual wolf. And Corey Martin helped me with adequacy and Person helped me with same age figures. Heidi Martin helped me with healthy living.
So when you have a question that you need to ask, one of the members on your team, how do you reach out to them and how do they answer your questions or give you advice or information?
We do one-on-one meetings. Calls or texts.
That pretty much sums it up. We brought Colby's binder today for anybody that wants to look through it. There are supported decision-making team agreements in here, samples. There's lots of different relationship-building activities that are geared towards supported decision-making. So y'all come by the table and take a look at it when you can. And just as a side note, we could not have done this without many of the people here in this room. It's not like it's something we did on our own. This was many, many years of advocacy. The ADAP partners and Alex and Clifton and Susan with People First, we've had much support along the way, but I'd be remiss not to mention those supports in and of themselves, but to get to this point where it's finally materialized into a bill that could actually be up and be passed is huge, and we're very excited. So thank you.
larger field, basically, there is the term called a circle of support. And basically, that is another piece we didn't talk about today, that people are, I'm starting this with my daughter now, because she's going to live a lot longer than I am, and her mom and her stepmom, of who are those people in different particular skill sets who Dina has already connected to build that circle so they can meet regularly, and then if she needs something, she can reach out to one of them. So again, this is a construct with supported decision-making or not that we all need to be thinking about for the future of a circle of support. So great.
So I'll just say very briefly that it's been an incredible honor and privilege for us at ADAP to be part of Colby's dream team and to work with Colby and Kim and all their family on the supported decision-making team. We've met in Birmingham, we've met in Tuscaloosa. It's been a really meaningful relationship. Thank you, Colby, for allowing us to be a partner with you. I'll also just mention that supported decision-making as a concept, as an alternative, has already passed in something like a dozen or more states. And I would just kind of close this portion of this discussion by saying quickly that I think what's important is that we get this out there as an option. None of these alternatives in and of themselves is the right answer for everybody at every time and place in their life. That's an individualized decision. What we're trying to do with Colby and Kim and the legislature is to create an additional option so that people can choose that in the state in the way that you've heard Colby describe. There is another bill that we wanted to share with all of you so that you would have it to consider as we make choices looking to the end of the evening and tomorrow. Alan was a little surprised when I told him that this bill is now pending in the state of Alabama legislature, but I will describe this briefly, and so this is something other than the Colby Act. There is a bill pending in the state legislature that would create an abuse and neglect registry that would, and the purpose would be that individuals who provide services, for example, who work with contractors of mental health or provide waiver services or any of those community-based services. Now that could also include residential services, but right now the state of Alabama does not have a system by which to collect information and track bad apples. Employees who are providing services that we are talking about and who are determined to have abused or neglected that privilege and to have hurt someone in the course of their employment. So there is a bill pending in the state legislature. It's known as HB, House Bill 105. HB 105 would create a state registry so that if an employee in the providing these services commits an act of abuse, neglect, or harm, there would be a central place to collect that information so that in the future, let's say an employee abuses a person at employer A, walks down the street, knocks on the door to employer B. Right now, employer B has almost no way to learn about that employee's past history. This act would create a way that you could check that employee's history. And so
You're saying so that employer B has no way to check that employer, if they're employed with employer A, they can't.
what if the applicant did not mention that they worked for employer A?
Right. Well, yeah, but they'd have access if there was something on that.
Well, if employer A chooses under current law to provide that information, as many as people can appreciate, sometimes all you'll get is a confirmation, yes, that person worked here.
Or they don't have any misdemeanors or...
Exactly. Yeah. So HB 105 is a bill that would create an abuse neglect registry for persons who are providing these services so that it would be much easier to check their history. We've been trying for several years to get the State Department of Mental Health to say yes to do this. One reason that their answer changed from no to yes is because providers in the state now support it. Providers decided that it is in their self-interest. They joined with advocates this year to ask DMH to support this idea. So, Alan, those are the two bills. I don't know exactly what the decision-making process is, and I'm not the decider. So the bills that we've asked you to consider after I sent Alan several are these two. The Colby Act, and essentially I'll just shorten it and call it Abuse Neglect Registry, HB 105. How do you want to proceed, Alan?
Okay, well, thank you for that.
Yes, sir.
And thank you, Kim and Colby, for all your wonderful work, and the team that I found out is here who helped put the video together. I got to see it. I think you all have seen their video. It is exceptionally well done, very powerful, and with your permission now, I'm going to be sharing it with other states that are still doing this. But I think what's important is on supported decision-making. It's kind of on a roll right now. As James said, I think we're up to 14 states. Illinois just passed it in our last session last year. And again, it was a mom who's a Partners grad who happens to work for the Illinois Human Rights Authority who lobbied for that bill and led that effort. So Partners grads seem to be doing a lot of work in this area. But it's a time that we know to do this, and we've got to ease, and even for guardians, there are places now to say, even if you're the guardian, respect the choice and the information of your son or daughter or family member or ward, whoever it is, because nobody should have that much power over Veronica's life to say, I know what's good for you, therefore. And that's really what some guardians do, and that's what you're trying to prevent. And we talked a lot about informed choice, so that's great. For tonight and tomorrow, this is practice. I'm sure most of you want to go jump over there, and I get it. I hope we can get a couple of groups that will work on each bill, because I want you to get comfortable with what you're going to get a little bit now and then tomorrow morning. How do you meet with a legislator? How do you organize if it's going to be a group of 3 or 4? I have an outline of what you have to cover in kind of a sequence in order to make the sales pitch. And that's really what you're going to be doing, is you're selling. You're selling to a legislator. Remember, you're informing, you're educating, and then the persuade, and you're going to ask. And that came through earlier from Eric as well. What do you want them to do? I want you to vote for this bill. Sometimes it might be, I want you to vote against this bill. That's going to vary. And the other thing that's important here is to learn the process of organizing and preparing for the meeting. Don't do meetings like this on the whim, because it's got to be specific, whether it's on this bill or that bill or another bill or the education budget, as Bill Fuller was talking about. You've got to have something specific that you're asking them to do. Even when it's off session, it might not be a bill, but to think about this concept or whatever it is. So what I want you to think about for the purposes, and we'll see how the votes come out. I hope I don't have to twist too many arms. For the purpose of practice and working with a couple of your peers, because I'll break you into groups of 3 to 4 at a max to then start working a little bit over dinner, and then you'll come back tomorrow and have about an hour and a half how to organize for a meeting with a legislator. And we've got a couple of them coming tomorrow, and it'll be real, and you'll get some coaching all morning on how to do that. So, for the first round of voting, and this is for only the Partners participants, please, how many of you would prefer to work in a group on the Colby's Act? Let me see a show of hands. Oh, wait a minute now. I didn't mean to talk people out of it. I'm looking for a divided house, so Wow, you must have really piqued their interest with the registry, James. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry? You want 105? Okay, so all three of you? Okay, let me see hands for 105. Oh my goodness gracious. Okay. Can somebody who can see everybody? Linda? Okay. All right, let's do it. How many people, first choice, would like to work on the registry, House Bill 105? Show of hands. Linda, you can see better than I can because of this column. If you'll count for me. 12 for the registry. Good job, James. And how many people then want to work on Colby's Act, which I already had made into law? One?
I can switch if it'll help.
Well, I would like some, I'd like it balanced. So how many total participants do we have this weekend?
There'll be one more coming for tomorrow that is not here now.
Okay. Okay, so it looks like so we'll have a total of 14 when the person comes tomorrow? Oh, 12.
Kim didn't vote, I'm sure she will. She's, yeah, so that's, we're counting heads. So,
And I'll switch over to Kim's too. I'm really flexible to either group.
Yeah, me too.
so
I mean, I think they both.
Again, this is just practice. This is to get you comfortable in a small group, organizing your thinking. I'll be making it very clear. If you need talking points to write in order to go into the meeting, perfectly legal, that's not a problem. Cheat sheets, whatever you need is fine. What I want you to do is understand how to organize the meeting to get to what you want them to do. And there's a process to do this. It can't be random.
I think for us parents of nonverbal children, it really hits home with this 105. It's just so
Yeah.
important.
Well, I could not believe it when he told me that there isn't one. There may be a few other states, but most states have this. And if somebody, because you have to do a criminal background check on anybody applying for a job in this system, and if that shows up, you're out.
But it's interesting because prosecuted elder abuse.
Yeah.
This is senior, this is just.
Well, the bill originally, apparently, it had other groups, but the DD community system was excluded. Now it's specifically included. That's the real amendment, right? I did read it, honest. Okay, so again, time out. Well,
we have 4 for Colby.
4 for Colby.
We're missing one person.
All right. Hold on, please. We have 4 for Colby, 12 for the registry. I'm gonna, whoa, so that's a total of 16?
And one is not showing up, so we should have one other person in here that
Okay, that's fine. Let me,
Gina, because she may not have seen to.
okay. Here's what I'd like to do. Please, whoa, hold that, and then we're gonna get dinner, I promise. Okay, what I'd like now, of the 12 people, whoa, who voted to work on the registry, are there 4 of you who would be willing for tomorrow and tonight to move over and work on Colby's? I'd like to have 4 groups, 2 on each, if we can get there. Because it'll be better for the legislators, it'll be better for us in debriefing, and that way they get to hear 2 different issues. So we have, you're willing to change to go from 105 to Colby. We have 2 here. You're willing to change? Yes? So that's 3. I need 1 more. 1 more person to... Okay, okay. All right, you know who you are. Please remember those of you who now said you're going to work on Colby's, and those of you...
back up for Colby's.
Okay.
Get everybody started.
Okay. Oh, that's good. Thank you. I can't do that.
Raise your hand again for the Colby one. Did y'all?
Mike?
You're self-directed, yes.
I need your TA. Can you put this one up on the screen? That's one of the two that's,
Key to a successful meeting.
yeah, it's in the, yes, I'm sorry, yeah. Okay? Are we all right? 2, 4, we're close. All right, ladies and gentlemen, hang loose for 2 minutes. So we're getting close to having 2 groups, total of 8 that will break into 4 and 4. Before we break for dinner, I want to pass out to you part 1, and you'll get part 2 in the morning, and hopefully we're going to get this up on the screen, yay, okay? And this is simple, and some of it may be repetitive, but this is my handout to you to guide you in your planning before we get to the actual scripting, which will be tomorrow. Okay, so hang with 2 minutes, all right? Again, I'm consistent in my language. The purpose is to inform, educate, and persuade. Be clear about your ask. In these cases, it's pretty easy. We want you to vote yes, maybe co-sponsor, whatever it is. Okay, that's not always our message. Number 2, your attitude. Partisanship is out the door. All of this is to be done respectfully, that they are there as public servants to hear what's on your mind. You've got to go in there with that kind of an attitude. If you go in on a chip on your shoulder or a negative attitude, do you think you're going to have a productive meeting? Not going to work. They can read you. I can read you. All right? Oh, where's my helper? Hang on. Whoops. Well, okay. Oh, there we go. I got it. Whoops. Darn. Okay, scroll it back up. Oh, okay, thank you. All right, do your homework. You heard about that from Bill Fuller. You're not going to be able to do that fully for tomorrow, but in the future, find out who they are, their committees, their background, where they went to school, possibly if it's in there, what faith they're part of. All of that stuff helps you get a sense, who are they? What makes them tick outside of the Capitol? What kind of a person are they, all right? History and policy context. You got plenty of that today, all right? And the values and goals. Now, some people get on me and say, Alan, you're too pushy on this, okay? I'm not. Think about other groups. If the Sierra Club, if any of you belong to it, is lobbying, do they operate with a core set of values and principles about the environment, whether you agree or not? Take the other side, National Rifle Association. Do they have a core set of values and principles? Every good advocacy group has to have a core belief system and build your issue off of. If not, you're splintered and you come in with 5 different messages, and I have seen this in states. And they play divide and conquer. Well, I met with this group and they said to do this. You guys said do it a different way. You guys said don't do it at all. Get your stuff together and someday come back. We cannot afford that. We must be unified on the foundation and then why this bill or that bill is important to us, okay? So that's part of what you can discuss over dinner. And ideally, you'd have a fact sheet. We don't have that, but in the real world, you would. So this is when you get together over dinner by your groups, just start talking about this in terms of framing the issue and starting to think about how you're going to put it together, not who's going to say what. We'll get into that in the morning. Then after dinner, I've got a fun thing for you, nothing to do with this, on the front anyhow, called the Trip Down Memory Lane, and we're going to have some good times going back in history. Okay? Got it? All right. What's the dinner plan? I'm sorry.
Dinner is outside.
Oh, is it a buffet and we take it and bring it in here?
Yes.
Okay.
So, like Alan said, we're going to divide up into different groups, so you may not sit where you're sitting now.
Right. So I would suggest for dinner that 4 people from each of the 2 issues sit together. I don't know if there's room for all 8 to sit at one table for each of the 2 topics. If you want to do that and just compare notes about each, that's okay, your call. But let's keep the groups separate so you can start having the conversation about the issue. Okay, begin to invest in it. All righty.
And we will start what Alan said, the next part of the program at 7 p.m.
At 7 o'clock, we will do
Yes.
Trip Down Memory Lane.
Yes, back in here. So
Back in here.
we will see
Okay.
you all then.
Thank you, sir. Whew.